But for people who like really get caught into the dominant and it's like very strong subtype, it's just taking that time to recognize the failures,
Mm.
especially the sort of invisible ones,
Mm.
um, that can offer valuable. So just seeing them as like opportunities to find valuable lessons. So that's the kind of thing. It's like the coaching points actually do come out of the neuroscience. They're
Yeah.
not just like, oh, here's a category and let's brainstorm some like ways to be helpful.
Is it like the awareness of failure doesn't even come in, or is it like a rejection of it, or is it both?
I
Or
think it can be both. I mean, all of us, I know certainly my type INTJs have like the superpower of tunnel vision, which allows us to get a lot done in a short period of time and can also shut out things that, like, wow, we really needed to pay attention to that
mm-hmm.
and we didn't.
Mm.
And then having this like moment a month down the line or whatever, like, oh my God, like, why wasn't I paying attention to this? Like, it was sort of, it wasn't completely out of awareness. It was hovering
Right.
at the side of awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And to sort of say it in a way that INFPs could relate to, for my type, which is FI is third, like somebody says something to me and it's like that little, like they're trying to communicate something.
Yeah.
And I hear the words and I put them to the side and I don't really take the time to digest the fact that they're trying to say something important.
Mm.
And it's just easy to come up with like the immediate reaction that's like the TE reaction, like, oh, it just means this, and like put this in this box over here.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh God, like, and I go back in my mind and it's, I can even put myself back in that situation and hear again with FI. And I'm like, oh, if only I had spent like 10 minutes listening to the person.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think there is that. There is this kind of like it can be completely outside of the person's awareness, or at the other end of the spectrum, they're aware of it and they just like concoct a reason why it's not valid. It's like a defense mechanism.
Mm.
But I think a lot of times what it is that it's something at the edge of awareness that we sort of push to the side. Like, oh, this doesn't belong on my plate, so I'm going to put this on this little like saucer over here.
Right.
And then we forget about it.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can notice that in terms of like introverted sensing and
Hmm.
physical health, and kind of noticing the signs of a pain or something like that, or not noticing it rather, until it gets to
Hmm.
the threshold of it's a problem now, and I needed to pay
Yeah.
attention to it before, but I did not. I didn't listen to that, I guess, call to adventure to heal myself, or notice how like I'm walking strangely, or like the stress or whatever. Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
and yeah, that has definitely been a running theme in my life. Just as
Hmm.
an example from introverted sensing as my tertiary function.
Yeah. And I really feel it's very easy, especially in and I know so it sounds sort of cliche, but in a very sort of modern artificial environment, for us to be doing things that as human beings we didn't evolve to do,
Mm-hmm.
like environment wise. And is one reason why I'm a proponent of, say, like Wim Hof breath work, not because I'm going to jump in an icy cold pond, um, but just to do the breath holding, and the length of time we can hold our breath is proportional to how, or inversely proportional to how stressed out we are.
Mm.
And so a person might be like, no, I have everything together, I'm relaxed. And then they discover they can't hold their breath, like they start panicking at 20 seconds or something, and I'm like, oh no, 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 you're stressed.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that for myself, sometimes I'm quite surprised and I take it seriously that oh wow, I could only hold my breath for 40-45 seconds today, and realize that my parasympathetic nervous system is like being neglected,
Mm-hmm.
and I need to just rebalance. And so like for me it's like objective data
Mm.
in a practice that tells me I'm more stressed out than I thought I was.
Yeah. Yeah, I have another personal example of that. I was talking on one of the forums that I'm in for hypnosis, and I was asking if somebody wanted to help me out with something, and getting feedback, and somebody told me to check my breath and see how I was breathing, and I timed
Mm.
it, and it was like rabbit breaths, like just really really shallow, really fast, in out,
Mm.
and I didn't even notice. I wasn't aware of it. Um, But then when I had that awareness, I was able to work on it and make it a natural correction after that. But that was a big sign of a very stressful time in my life that I didn't notice. It didn't even show up.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
breathing properly is helpful. So, okay.
Perhaps the most helpful thing. Yes.
Yeah, I highly recommend breathing.
And then here is the I think it's sort of weird. The thing that's the most relatable is at the end in the last part, which is out of
Oh, okay.
32 sensors, which were your top six, like most densely wired? Not necessarily the same as most active. So in my neuroscience of personality book and the way I was analyzing the data then, it was just about the most active regions,
Hmm.
like the volume of activity. Whereas now we're actually computing on who has the most number of. It's not the loudest person in the room; it's the person who has the most number of social connections.
Okay.
And I think they're both valid measures, but we do it this way, and
Which
it
is more
just to keep it
helpful
consistent.
to
Yeah,
look
and
at
not
here?
confuse people. Yeah. So we see number one is grounded believer, which is that, holds to,
Absolutely.
an identity, to convictions, beliefs, values of what they regard as, really important,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of context.
Mm.
And that's sort of how that region works, is like what holds true regardless of context.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's like that region lights up when people are, asked to name three things that they really like and respect, or that,
Yeah.
for some, they actually, that part of the brain gets very active when it's like things you dislike.
Uh-huh.
Um, and the region of the brain is also involved in modesty, both physical modesty and modesty in terms of accomplishments and emotions and that kind of thing. Um,
Mm.
and in things like interviewing witnesses after like observing the scene of a crime or something, um, that can people report in a way that they don't embellish what they
Mm.
saw, so that they're recalling just the actual facts, um, with accuracy. And so
Okay.
I would say that region is very much like FI and SI. Those are the two functions it supports in terms of skills.
It feels
So
like
not a
it.
surprise that some types like ISTJ and INFP would tend to have a bit of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think for a sort of adjacent type, like say INTP, that there is that introverted sensing element that could actually allow that region to be quite strong. And then the FI parts of it actually are strong too, but they're in the shadows, so they're outside of their conscious awareness.
Mm.
And that's how that would show up. And so there's a little, and then there's some like bullet points there about
Mm-hmm.
how it shows up in the workplace. Um, Ideally, one is in a workplace that actually allows those to show up. That may not always happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Um, and Japan is not a place where you get to express your identity overtly,
No, no, definitely not.
unless that identity happens to match with some anime character, and you're in Harajuku. And then number two here is the quick analogizer. So that's this left frontal region here, temple region. And that's sort of the short-term working memory and the holodeck of the mind.
Mm-hmm.
Um, really thinking in terms of analogies,
Mm-hmm.
noticing what fits a situation and then making inferences about it, because we build up like a little mental model. And so we can make inferences based on what we see in that. I'm going to say it's sort of a creative, loosey-goosey kind of mental model.
Mm.
It's not like a 3D visual spatial defined, none of that. I mean, it could have those things, but then have to be connected to some other brain regions. There's mirror neurons is strongly what defines this region. So the
Okay.
ability to observe what's going on with others, and either through rapport building to mirror that back, that's mirror neurons, imagining what's going on in the person's situation just by observing them. NFPs are so good at that.
Mm-hmm.
They really can give the illusion that, oh, I'm your best friend, like I totally understand what you're going through. They don't necessarily feel that. They don't have to take on that. That would be a different region and another step. But that really is a great way to exercise a certain kind of empathy
Mm.
and rapport building. And it can also show up as just like using your imagination. I think that's how it shows up for me, like visualizing or imagining another place or time, like in history or different context, fancifully, and then what are the inferences that would follow from that?
Mm.
If you change a few variables in society, like, oh yes, we're living during the Roman Empire now, but with technology,
Mm.
like my brain like immediately gets to work
Yeah.
from that analogy and like that tweaking a couple variables, and then how might that be different? Um,
Okay.
and then also some workplace things that go with that. I suspect that that's what you do a lot with clients.
Hmm.
I mean, literally, like you're having them work with a visualization,
Hmm.
and sort of, I guess you need to see that in a way at the same time that the other person does to
Hmm.
help give them like ideas and so on, and then also rapport building with them, and it is a very nice like NE balance. Not that it's just NE. I think it can be like FE also, but it's a nice NE balance to FI. So you have like these two regions here that like balance each other out pretty
Mm.
nicely. Um,
Okay. Yeah, both of
yeah,
those sound amazing. As in, like, just
yeah,
talking about, it, I'm like, oh yeah, that's great. I love that.
yeah, yeah. And what's so cool is that, and I think just a reminder that we were doing it more in the way that I used to do it in the lab, which was more spontaneous
Mm.
and impromptu, and like getting more of the person a little bit by surprise.
Hmm.
And we actually may see a person more genuinely when they're it's not just like a usual sit down academic kind of experience.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I mean, I honestly, even though I would say, well, this is one side of you, and then when you were doing the other one with the protocol, like that's a different side, and that's true. It's a
Hmm.
true statement. um but it's, which one is more reflective of sort of INFP skills? We're all social creatures. That's something I appreciate about socionics,
Mm.
as the Eastern European version of type. They're like, person's personality is inherently social,
Mm.
and so what does that mean? And then number three, the curious explorer. So of the two executive regions, goal focus and open ended, it's like, yeah, your open ended one is really, you can see the little icon there is the microscope over the world. And as the globe turns, or you can take the microscope and zoom in and zoom out, and turn the globe and see any part that you want.
Mm.
So being very open to new data and experiences, and that region gets active when people brainstorm, when they engage in some kind of open-ended task,
Hmm.
and then you sort of stop them in a moment, like, how far are you along in this task? In theory, the person shouldn't know because it's like open-ended,
Hmm.
but in practice, many people can say something like, oh, I'm like 40% done, or I'm halfway done.
Okay.
um, I know I always underestimate. I'm like, oh, I'm 85% done. Like, it sounds so specific, but I'm really only two-thirds done. Uh, I'm optimistic that way.
Uh,
But and then that is so balanced by number four, the sure clarifier, um, which is this is not in the original book because we have
mm.
32 sensors instead of 16. But this is a region that is in the right hemisphere actually, but is not very right brain at all.
Hmm.
Um, it very much is an introverted sensing with a little TE and maybe TI mixed in there. Like noticing part of a pattern and then being able to complete the rest of it, especially when it's like an object or an idea or something like a company org chart. Just to
Mm.
recognize the structure. We're not manipulating it or defining it or anything. It's just like to recognize it and to complete something that's recognized.
Okay.
Um, and obviously, we all have to do that in some way.
Mm.
You see the tail of a dog, you can complete the picture that there's probably a dog attached to that tail.
Cool.
How that shows up is things like making comparisons
Mm.
and, what you're certain about and what's seen versus what's an inference, being sort of attentive to familiarity, um, and then anything that can go with that, like what reduces, because this region in completing the picture is going to do things like reduce risk and uncertainty, especially reducing uncertainty. So very, very SJ kind of region, or
Mm.
introverted sensing. But I see a little bit of some other functions in there too.
Okay.
Yeah, and then 5 and 6, like 5 is pretty much I mean, anybody of any type, and our whole culture revolves around logos.
Mm.
So the use of words, and that, I mean, especially in the US, or I think any legalistic culture, it's like, well, you said this word instead of that word. You said this pronoun instead of that pronoun.
Mm.
That's like a very specific brain region. And I think it's also culturally selected for. Like academically, there's the verbal section of the SAT. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's this idea that people who speak well must be intelligent,
Mm.
which, by the way, isn't true
Right.
um, at all.
Yeah.
Um, so there's this ability to simply process words. It isn't always, even though I say precise speaker, it isn't always about speaking. It can be about listening,
Mm.
but it's about listening to content as
Okay.
opposed to the why, the motivation behind something.
Is this a common region for INFPs?
It is, because INFPs in general tend to be auditory. I would say that in comparison to the other very different auditory region, which is about voice tone and intention and so on,
Mm-hmm.
that this is more of an FJ region rather than just FP. But
Mm.
I think that the wonderful thing is that FPs tend to be good at both kinds of listening and speaking,
Mm.
even if it's just to themselves. Um, but certainly both kinds of listening to the affective quality as well as the word content. Whereas FJ types tend to be more focused on word content,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
then even though they tend to be like an empathic type, they often miss the delivery, like the undercurrent that comes underneath the delivery is actually what I should say.
Mm.
That FPs can easily, like without even thinking about it, pick out. Um, and even though that particular region, um, like this intuitive listener doesn't stand out as one of the top 6 for you, it's probably like number 7 or something, and just quite didn't fit on the list
Mm.
of top 6.
Okay.
And you got another one, and that's really this um, sensitive adjuster here is paying attention to verbal and visual detail. And that's the other thing. These two regions here are very much promoted by Western culture. I mean, just like modern culture in general, to be
Mm.
honest. Certainly Japanese culture too, with the sensitive adjuster. That just
That's
sounds
Japan.
Japanese.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Um,
Yeah.
and it's noticing, visual detail. Yes, the ability to, and a kind of visual detail is facial expressions.
Mm.
Another kind of visual detail is the written characters or words on a page. Um, and just it also, that part of the brain connects to the hippocampus,
Mm-hmm.
and that area of the hippocampus in the left hemisphere that's more about factual recall. And so this region is quite like home to a variety of things which are related to each other, but may not necessarily go with all in one person.
Mm.
But I do think in general, like, and certainly from the folks in India and our India database, this is like a very strong region and Indian culture.
Easily attend
Yeah.
to facts, rules, details. Ask how do others react? Are they likely to accommodate others' input? Prefer a workplace that's safe, where people are careful and considerate. Yeah,
Mm.
that's very, very Japanese.
Yeah.
Okay.
And imagine some other INFP who doesn't have that as 6th. Maybe that's like 12th.
Mm.
And their number 6 is like in the right hemisphere and is something about art appreciation
Mm.
or something like that. And so, of course, the career will have nurtured and pushed them in a different direction.
Right.
But at least from the result here, and this was this impromptu thing, that you've developed beyond INFP an element of, or maybe we could say the Japanese culture has encouraged it.
I wonder, for my personal curiosity, which one was it? The precise speaker. If that
Mm.
has been something that maybe I've trained myself on through moving to Japan and having to learn a different language and picking it up and um,
There is, I can't say for you personally, but I have observed, and there is this general observation that when people are speaking in their non-native language, that region is going to be more active,
mm,
even if they're quite good at their non-native language. That region will come off as more active than it actually would be. I mean, I remember when someone came in and she'd been in America a long time, and she was even learned English when she was in Germany, and yet when she did an activity that was, like German facilitated, the brain activity was not as high as when she had to do everything else in
mm.
English.
Okay. Yeah, I
Yeah.
just through work translating and that's extremely tiring to go back and forth in both languages, and I definitely feel I have to like I have to, despite being here for 17 years, I can pretty much tune out things that are going on around me in terms of Japanese
Mhm.
conversation. Um, and if I try to jump in the middle of a conversation, it takes a little bit of like booting up, I suppose, and
Mhm.
more action and attentiveness. And it does,
Mhm.
I could see it as my brain being more active in that sense. Whereas English,
Yeah.
like I can hear it from a mile away. I'm like, oh, English? What? Oh, it just kind of like seeps into my brain. So,
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. That was even my experience. The year I spent in Japan, and especially the second half of the year when I was taking courses in Japanese,
mm-hmm.
which I don't know how I managed that, but somehow I did. Like university courses in Japanese. I
Yep.
know I was much better in the past, and and I really made an effort to. I had some like clients that I did some like proofreading or tutoring and English kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
but for the most part and there were English speakers and the rest of the international department there. But I really tried to make friends with Japanese people and spent only time speaking Japanese.
Mm.
And then when I would get around to someone, it was just like me and like actually some dude who lived on my street who was also an exchange student, and we're just speaking English. I'm like, oh my god, what a relief! There's just like at the end of the
Yeah.
week, and my brain is tired,
Mm-hmm.
like, it's just tired in general, and speaking Japanese just added, like, an extra layer of work on top of it, and it's like, "Oh, I can just speak English."
Yep.
Like, that's so nice.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting when some words don't come out in English and the Japanese word comes up first, or when I'm speaking Japanese and like, I'm missing a word and the English word is right there. Well, I was very impressed with your Japanese ability as you were giving the presentations,
Mm,
because I knew that you haven't been here in quite a while,
yeah.
and still I was like, wow, it's quite a lot of Japanese and everything's
Mhm.
still in there.
So
Okay.
what is I'm curious, because I don't quite know the experience. It says, "Enjoy your differences," is how the report ends. I gotta thank
Hmm.
Adrian for that. I didn't think of that line.
I
Um
like it.
what how did it feel, or what was it like? Because it's one thing to sort of read some type theory descriptions or subtype descriptions, and another one, it's another experience to like get back results that say like, oh yeah, this is your subtype.
Hmm. Um, so since reading your first book about it, which it's right over there, I
Hmm.
can't reach it. Hold on.
You use your telekinetic Jedi power.
I tried. I don't know if you saw. I moved my arm out and nothing happened. Unfortunately, I guess it's off right now. Um, so since reading Our Brains in Color, um,
Hmm.
however many years ago that was now, um, yeah, I was just very curious about what actually is happening and which regions are,
Hmm.
I don't know if responsible for what is happening is the right word, but which ones are active when I'm
Hmm.
doing different things. And of course, based off personality type, hearing about the different patterns of the halo pattern, for example, like, oh, yeah, that's great. And the naming's perfect too for INFPs. Um,
Yes.
but then, and so like I studied it and I read your other books as well, and I drew my own like brain chart for it, and I have like
Hmm.
books of the different regions, and I was even like
Hmm.
kind of making up my own names for them as like kind of RPG
Why not?
names, or thinking of them as like gear or armor or weapons or whatever.
Hmm.
Brain went off into those directions too. But actually having the actual experience was, first of all, really exciting because I was like, I'm finally going to know. I'm going to get some closure on it. I was given the results, whatever it was, a couple weeks ago, maybe. Um,
Mhm. I think
and I
it's
just,
already been 2 weeks. Yeah,
was it?
almost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I skimmed it, but I was
Mm.
waiting for the big reveal, I suppose, from you and the explanation of what is actually going on. So like I looked through and I was like, okay, it's cool, actionable tips. That's nice. And it was nice to see the regions. I was a little afraid when it said front bias because I wasn't really sure what that meant. I was like, oh no, am I
Mhm.
typed wrong? Or, like my mind went all sorts of different directions with that.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
this I found interesting the microvolts
Mm.
because I'm into like binaural beats, and I don't know if
Oh,
you have
yeah, yeah,
more
yeah. Yeah, and
opinion
that's
on.
exactly those light and sound machines and stuff. Like, yeah, those are the same brainwaves. Yeah.
Okay, and so like I like kind of playing around with those, and also seeing if through self hypnosis is it possible to activate different ones, or just kind of get um, into for example like theta faster through self
Mm.
hypnosis. So I was just curious when I first saw these. Um, and then seeing like the different regions and being able to open it up and get more explanation on what the region does.
Mhm.
It did feel like, again, another RPG analogy, but like it was like a skill that I put points in sometimes. I was like, yes, I
Mhm.
definitely have developed that one. Sometimes there were surprising ones. Sometimes looking at it, I'm like, oh, I didn't, I thought maybe I would be better at that. Um, but yeah, it was kind of like a fun exploration of seeing how all these
Mhm.
different parts exist. Now connecting them, of course, because it's this is not something that I've poured expertise and time and developed into, but
Mhm.
like seeing how like F7 and F8 would relate to each other and connect to each other, as you explained earlier, is not something that I can uh, easily come up with, right? Maybe with some
Yeah.
time I could kind of piece them together, imagine some different scenarios. Yeah, so that was cool. I also feel like I was like, I wonder if I can develop a connection between O1 and O2 and, PO8 and P8 to see if like there's a possible way to develop my brain intentionally
Mhm.
to connect those for the sake of having this, I guess, a holistic circle. I'm not sure. Please stop me if there's anything that you want to say, or I can just keep
No, no,
talking.
that's all great. I'm just happy to hear your experience. Yeah.
There's a lot of information, which is really good too. Looking at the different types of tasks that I did, um, I personally, there were some that I was like, I want to do that more. Like, give me another one. Let's
Mhm.
play with that one. Like, of values sorting was pretty fun.
Mhm.
Strange word pairs, I enjoyed that. Um, some of them also, I was like, no more of that. The I thought I would be better at the visual spatial problem of like reconstructing the box. I don't know how it's like
Mhm.
an
The cube.
outline,
Yeah.
of a cube. I was like, oh, I got this one, and then when I started doing it, I was like, wait, and I completely forgot the task. And then I was trying to get back into it. I was like, no, so it's just, and I was a little frustrated by not being able to do
Mhm.
that because in my mind, whether this is true or something that I imagine, I can see from different angles. Like I can take something and rotate it around in my head and kind of create an image of it.
Mhm.
So I thought that that would be just easy peasy, but
Mhm.
it was quite difficult. And when I was asked if I wanted to do it again, I was like, nope, I'm good. And so that was an
Yeah, you're
interesting.
right. There's more visual spatial problems. Yeah, we have like a backup activity.
Mm.
Yeah.
Um, yep, expert talk. I felt good about that one.
Mhm.
The ball toss was like, yep, got to work on some extroverted sensing, maybe introverted thinking. I don't know, because I kept missing it. I was like, okay, all right, I need to get back into some sort of physical activity, which was a quick, practical insight into my behavior
Mm,
and something that I
mhm,
want to develop more for myself. Because I used to break dance and I used to play soccer and
mm,
um, did taekwondo for many years and another style too. And then I stopped. Oops, I stopped since coming to Japan pretty much. And so, yeah, getting back into that with my daughter or son would be a fun
mhm,
activity. So it was nice to learn. Personally, I was like, oh, man, I got to get that Halo bias up. It's got to be number one, just because of whatever perception I have of what this is. And I think just the desire to be well-rounded in regard to language and
mm,
people skills and memory and imagination. It's a very aspirational thing for me as an INFP. And people say like I'm good at communicating, but I don't feel that way, which is also probably something to look into.
mhm,
The technical tasks things, social emotional people.
mhm.
Um, I wasn't really sure how to process that. Um, yeah, I like having different ways of viewing things and different like uh, perspectives of it, but I
Mhm,
wasn't sure how to think about that in terms of my INFP personality type.
mhm. Yeah,
And
we want to give the coaches something to do with the reports, so
mm-hmm,
so they still feel relevant. So that's and I should mention, by the way, for those listening, that in working in partnership with Personality Hacker, that as they continue to have more like mini live events around the United States,
mm-hmm,
and now folks can also go to Japan, and we have some locations in Europe where people can go and get do like a brain imaging session
mm-hmm,
and get their results too. And that's I don't see it as competing with type. It's like another data point that adds to our experience. And even though it's not going to say at the bottom, well, you tested out as a such and such type,
mm-hmm,
um, I just don't feel that's right, because type is not the same thing as the brain. Like the
yeah,
type is a form of consciousness that we have, or pattern of consciousness, um, that it can really augment. It is almost like MBTI step two,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
in that it gives like these like other developmental dimensions that are there. And when done over a period of time, like every few years, I do a session, or I ask somebody to
mm-hmm,
do a session for me, or I do something very focused. And it's interesting to see, um, how that's shifted over time or in specific contexts as
mm-hmm,
well. Like sustained period of time, like what's happened to my brain over the course of 15 years.
mm-hmm.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
good news is
Again,
is apparently I've developed more like frontoparietal connections in both the left and right hemisphere, and those are supposed to be like really big hallmarks of like creative problem solving. So I'm
okay.
like, woohoo! Like I've gotten better at that. Um, but yeah, and for folks who are wondering in terms of like the functionality of the brain regions or the kind of algorithms that we use, I mean, all of this, it uses two algorithms which are very commonly used in EEG, which is called FFT, or force fast Fourier transform, and Hebbian learning to create the network diagrams. There's like a competitor to Hebbian learning, but I don't think that competitor makes sense, so I picked that one.
Mm-hmm,
Um,
okay.
and then in terms of the functionality of the regions, like we know these things from people who've suffered strokes and injuries, other injuries to the brain, and it's very much, like Wikipedia content, just
Mm.
not written usually in convenient English.
Very much appreciate how accessible your writing is and your explanations of the types and also just the different
Mhm.
dynamics of the brain. It's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I got that. I don't need to look up
Mhm.
words to figure it out, or it's very easy to read and to grok, to understand, and even maybe to apply it. Um,
Mhm.
so
Yeah, I feel that there's still a little bit of ways to go, and adding some value to the report. I mean, some things that people have asked for to be able to zoom in a way on certain things.
mhm.
And then the other request is to have more like specific actionable items that coming from sensing types.
Mm.
which I think is very fair. So we'll keep working on those things. Whereas I think for other people, sometimes it's just the excitement of seeing the results, like in a broad way,
Yeah.
is like that's more than enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was definitely a huge part for me. I was, just very excited about it. But then while reading through it, you can see like some of the questions, some of the locations, and different places where it would come out more, or different ways to develop it. Or,
Mm,
I could read something like prefer a workspace that changes from day to day and asks you to adapt. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's true. I like that.
mm,
I'd like to have variety. And it's not just affirming, but it's like, yeah, I've set my life up in a way that allows for that.
mhm,
And then that kind of advice could be given to other people as well from myself, other INFPs, like maybe you want to explore doing this.
mhm,
Because
mhm.
there are so many, to me, there's a lot of practical application. But I can see as, a sensor might want even more. And, different questions you could ask for yourself, different activities that you could do to possibly develop the regions or the skill sets involved with those. Like when we were talking, when you were here, about doing math while doing some physical activity.
Mhm.
Um, I thought
Oh,
that
yeah,
was
yeah, yeah.
interesting. And I was like, oh, maybe that's something I could explore with to make me, feel differently about math.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah,
okay.
very nice. Well, I guess people will have some questions too, and I do try and respond when folks give interviews and post those. Like people make comments, and I don't respond to all the comments, but I will try and respond to some of them. And if folks want to know more, there's some books out there.
Yes.
Decode Your Personality and The Magic Diamond.
Hmm.
And of course, well, you showed Our Brains in Color, which is actually out of print, but I think that I hope the ebook is still available. Maybe I need to actually make that available because I want to do like a version 2 of that, and then
Yeah.
Neuroscience of Personality, the original. Yeah,
Hmm. Yeah, they
yeah.
are
Although believe it
downstairs.
or
I would
not,
hold them up right now, but I cannot.
yeah, no, it's all good. Believe it or not, the most popular book though on Amazon is actually Jung on Yoga.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, because I think it's got those two magic words, like so many people like Jung and so many people like yoga,
Yeah.
and they just go together. And that it's for a completely different day, and it's a totally different topic.
We talked about the books that are available, and I can link those down
Mhm.
below. Also, if somebody is interested in becoming a practitioner of
Mhm.
doing these brain scans, is there a specific location? Should they go to puzzlin.org or should they go somewhere else?
I think the best thing is if they're interested in being affiliate practitioners, is to email me,
Okay.
and then I can point the person to like the next upcoming training. The next one is in May at the Personality Hacker Live event in Seattle, but that one is already closed to
Mm-hmm.
registration. It's full, and there's like some pre-work and that kind of thing that comes along with it as well. But there are some local trainings that I do with people, like we did in Japan,
Mm-hmm.
um, and probably. Also, Adrian and I have trained some people in Europe. Not a lot. We're sort of like they're looking a little bit in a gray space. But the next one, which is probably the most relevant to people, I think it will be Orlando in November, and that will be
Okay.
open to the general public. So it doesn't right now when people do it, they need to have already taken some personality hacker trainings.
Mm-hmm.
But the one in November and onwards there'll be like a 1 day, like get you up to speed on type kind of thing.
Okay.
And then they will be able to do and we don't cover just the brain imaging. It's like future tools for type. And it also covers the use of AI for type and
Mm.
simulation based learning. So,
Okay.
because yeah, AI is a whole other topic that's
Yeah.
has some surprises in store for type.
Okay.
Some good things. Engage people in virtual processes. You can go on a date with any type. Just load it with a type profile and maybe like a little backstory about the person or your favorite literary character, and
Uh-huh.
ask Chat GPT or Claude 3 or whatnot to just take you
Hmm.
through a date. You can even report every couple of minutes how you're doing on a
Mm.
scale of 1 to 10. Um,
That sounds like
yes.
a dream for INFPs.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's I don't think that was. I think somebody told me they had tried something like that, and I'm like, oh, we have to add that as like a sample activity to the course.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, there is definitely there's already multiple people. I think you even said this earlier. I mean, as we were chatting just before we started,
Hmm.
that AI is the worst it's ever going to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's yeah, there's lots of interesting stuff coming up. And I actually worked in AI, and it's like my dissertation and the first like 7 or 8 years at UCLA, and
Mm.
this was back in the late '90s and early 2000s. And then I was like, oh god, it's going to take another 20 years for AI to be interesting, and I don't want to spend 20 years like plowing through a process that is going to end up
Yeah.
being obsolete. Um, so I did neuroscience instead. But yeah, AI is a fascination, and I think like many NTs, I love the idea of androids. So
Uh-huh.
it's yeah,
Yep.
and then eventually maybe we'll have androids that come in different types.
Sure. I'm sure that's
Yeah,
not
heaven
a big
help us all.
stretch.
No, no, it's weirdly not. It might take a while, but it's I mean, we know they're going to be produced in different personalities anyway, but they'll
Uh-huh.
also need to be predictable enough that nobody will be sued about anything.
Uh, I'm sure there will be all
Yeah.
sorts of ups and downs and goods and bads that will come from it, but hopefully it
Yeah.
amounts in a positive direction. Thank you very much for going through this in depth exploration and review of the INFP personality type and how it relates to the different brain patterns. It was very informative and very helpful. And I'm looking forward to the next time that we can talk about something related to personality type and brain space and INFPs. So thank you very
Mm-hmm.
much.
And superheroes, perhaps. Yeah.
Bring them in. Yes, let's do
You bring them in.
it.
Yes, that's right.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks.
Yeah.